Well, we've certainly seen a lot of disruption, haven't we, in the last couple of years? And the questions I get asked, I suppose I get asked, what can we do immediately to fix it? Pretty hard because, semiconductors have a long gestation period. They're inelastic in supply. But there are other things that we can do immediately. I also get asked, will it be over soon? When will it be over, George? And I'm afraid the answer to that is probably not this year and maybe not even next year. That's a spoiler alert, but look at that a bit further on. But really, I'd say the most strategic questions we get are, how can we be sure that we aren't going to be in the same place in another 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? But before we get to that, perhaps I could ask you, Yasha, from your perspective, where do you think we stand right now? And how did we get there?
Yeah. So first part of the question in terms of how do we see the year 2022, pretty much with the same intensity, especially the second half of the year 2021, essentially was very much allocations, tight supply chain, demand outstripping supply, and essentially at a time, the explanation was pandemic. Coming out of the pandemic, all the supply chain rules and principles were disrupted, and essentially it impacted everything. And electronic component supply chain anyway being very volatile, especially for certain commodities like memory products or processors or anything else, but essentially it spread everywhere. So we see the year 2022 with the same intensity, meaning very much of an allocation year. It's essentially the seller's market. Demand is extremely high, regardless of any other new topics that have occurred in the industry, which we'll talk about it, I guess, a little later in terms of the intensified geopolitics and war. But coming out of the pandemic, all the supply chain rules being disrupted, and anyway, with the existing amount of geopolitics that was going on, essentially we're looking at a year that is very much in allocation, hard, in terms of if you're a product manufacturer and you're buying electronic components, you're going to struggle on going through your quotes, and you're going to be looking at extended lead times, exaggerated prices. Microcontrollers that were selling at $6-7 now, they're at like 100 times fold, not even 10 times fold. So there is no light at the end of the tunnel, at this stage for the remainder of the year 2022. How did we get here? I think those are the topics that we could discuss, but essentially, we're in the world where it was pretty much given for the last 4 decades. It's a globalized world. You'll design electronic components in the UK, you'll have them etched, in United States or in China, have them packaged in Indonesia, test them, in a different country. And those rules in the last couple of years, even before the pandemic, came on the question, starting, at a time with the previous administration, with the geopolitics, then coming to, obviously the disruptions of, that we've all faced, during the pandemic. That, hopefully, we're coming out of it, at least in some parts of the world, like where I am here in California, United States. And essentially, again, the electronic components by nature is very volatile. The smallest change in a globalized world on any sense, virtually or actually throws it off. And of course, let's not forget that we're in the world that demand is of electronic components, with popularized, EV electric vehicles, all the way to people sitting at home with multiple laptops, one at work, one at home, buying tablets for their kids in terms of doing their educations, all the way to, more luxury, unnecessary luxury, like, heated toilet seats, as you've mentioned, I think before. I've always liked that, and and many other things that has essentially put the demand outstripping the supply. So as try to answer both part of your question in terms of where we are this year and how we came about it.
I loved what you said. For years Forrester's been saying it's the age of the customer. Yeah, actually, when you talk about allocation of semiconductors, it's kind of the age of the supplier, and will be until we either increase capacity or get smarter about what we do with the capacity we have, and particularly get smarter about redesign. So when we talk to folks about this, we say, yeah, exactly as you said, there's political factors, of course. People were afraid there would be an embargo. There was a lot of consolidation in the semiconductor business, so there were not too many players left. And then
True.
there was a kind of a bonanza when everybody, as you said, they had to have another laptop for their kids at home. Plus, they were working at home. Plus, they were getting bored, so they bought a new TV. We're here doing a virtual conference. Massive increase. People doing, of course, bit mining as well. It had a very significant impact. Every device you have, and particularly your car, is stuffed with semiconductors now. So yeah, there's a classic imbalance. Now, what's going to happen around that? Yeah, people are starting to build out. You've seen, for example, what Intel has done already, committed to building new fabrication plants, and a very significant investment in Europe. So Europe had its CHIPS initiative to try and, let's say, reshore some of this stuff. And we don't know what kind of incentives were involved, but they certainly announced, Intel announced a huge investment in Germany to do this, the same as they have in California. So we can expect some of that to come on stream, but not just yet. It's not going to solve it for a couple of years.